I read a lot about this a number of years ago. A lot of studies done at MIT is one of them, and Harvard is another. There is no such thing as multitasking. We cannot, as people, multitask.
I think the reality is, I think a lot of business owners know that they need to focus on just one thing, but there's a lot of stuff going on. How do you stay focused on one thing in the midst of all that?
Less stress, more time, more money. Welcome to the Cashflow Contractor Deep Dive.
Martin, it's the middle of summer. We haven't recorded actually in, I think, almost 6-7 weeks, but we've had episodes going out. We recorded a bunch before the summer really got kicked off, and now here we are. We're back in the swing of things.
We're
It's
back.
good to see you.
Right. You too.
Yeah.
Best having you around.
Yeah. So I think a common thing in the summer. Oh, what's that?
I was just going to say, I've had to figure out some technical issues by myself with nobody to call. It's been terrible.
That's great.
Like turning on my computer, stuff like that,
Yeah,
technical.
not the hard stuff.
The hard
Well,
stuff.
I think a common thing that comes up in the summer, and I'm excited that we're talking about this, is just, I think focus can go out the window a lot of times as a business owner, especially if you've got kids and they're not in school and there's family visiting and vacations planned and clients are gone or whatever it is, that really just the office can be a little bit harder. And I think that having one thing to focus on is maybe a little bit challenging in this time. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what one thing is, what that concept is, why we use it, the value that it brings, but also what are the barriers to having one thing, not just in this season, but in general as a small business owner, as a contractor. So let's get into it. I first heard about the concept of one thing from you because of your coaching sessions. What is one thing? How do you use that with your clients?
Well, first of all, I give credit where credit's due, and it's Gary Keller wrote a book. He was one of the founders of Keller Williams. He wrote a book titled, I think it's Your One Thing or The One Thing, but it's an excellent, excellent book. Pretty easy to read. It makes a lot of sense. So he didn't originate the concept of one thing, but he kind of popularized that title.
Yeah.
And one of the points that he makes, I'll give you 2 points that he makes in the book. And one of them is the word priority is a Latin word and it means first. It doesn't mean among the first, it means first.
Yeah.
So right off the bat, it's not really correct to speak of your priorities, although we all do it, because you can't have more than one first, even in this modern day of everybody gets a participation trophy.
Yeah.
So that's one of the main concepts. The other one behind it is the 80-20 rule that most people are familiar with, that says that 80% of your benefit comes from 20% of your customers. 80% of your problems come from a presumably different 20% of your customers. But basically, there are certain areas where you get more bang for the buck if you concentrate on those areas. That's those areas within the 20%. And one of Gary Keller's exercises in his book is for you to sit down and write down 25 things that you would have called priorities if I hadn't corrected that on the Latin. But 25 high impact things that you would like to do and could do and have an impact on your business. Then he applies the 80-20 rule. And so he said, if you have 25 things and you take choose 20% of them, which is 5 out of 20, and then eliminate the rest, you now have 5 things where you had 25. And then you do it again. You look at those 5 things and say, which of those 5 things would have the greatest impact if I got to work on it? You pick that, and that's your one thing. And I guess one last thing here is the principle of one thing is based on the fact that we cannot, as people, multitask. I read a lot about this a number of years ago, a lot of studies done on it. At MIT is one of them, and Harvard is another. And there is no such thing as multitasking. Some people who appear to multitask are really just doing fast switching. But there are all kind of data about how long it takes you to get, if you're working on one subject and you switch to another, there's a lag. There's some really good stats on that. But there's a lag before you can get up to speed. And then if you jump back to the other thing, you have to endure that lag again. So you're spending a lot of time jumping back and forth and wasting in transition. So picking the one thing that can have the greatest impact, and that's the one thing we're going to concentrate, is one of the major skills that highly effective managers have.
Yeah. I think that with the one thing, it's really important for it to be fairly narrow, because I think what will happen sometimes is that you'll choose one thing, but you'll keep it fairly broad. Like, well, I'm going to focus on our
Get
marketing.
more customers. Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll get more customers. There we go. That's the one thing.
Which is
Well-
great. Like, hey, at least that's some level of focus, that you're not going to put yourself into operations or whatever, but it's still not focused enough. And it just needs to be narrowed down. I think if we make a little acronym for one, it's optimized. So making sure that you actually have the energy, resources, time to be focused on that one thing. Because it's you just saying, hey, this is our one thing, but not really setting yourself up to actually focus on it doesn't really do anything. And then narrowed, where, hey, we actually have narrowed down to like this one thing. It's not this broad area, but it's very clear that this is the one thing we're going to do. We're going to make 10 calls a day to customers. Okay, like we can do that, right? And then effective. Hey, like let's choose something that's actually going to be able to make a difference, that it's not going to lead to just more questions or no results and leave us feeling like the one thing wasn't worthwhile. But yeah, optimized, narrowed, and effective. Choose one
that's
thing to
great.
focus on. I think the reality is, I think a lot of business owners know that they need to focus on just one thing, but practically it's pretty hard, especially when you're a small business owner and you founded the company. There's a lot of stuff going on. You've got to hire a new employee. Someone just quit. You have to train someone. You are dealing with payroll issues or accounting issues. Customers hasn't paid your invoices. You're dealing with leads coming in that you need to close, but then you have to deal with the handoff, and there's just a lot of stuff going on, right? And how do you stay focused on one thing in the midst of all that?
Well, that's a really good point, because we do talk about one thing, but it's not really one thing.
Yeah.
You still have to do what you have to do. And meaning all the things that you just mentioned, the day-to-day, the quotidian stuff. But what we're doing with our one thing is fighting our way out of that. That can be, maybe you need customers, or marketing is where you need to go first. But a lot of times it's time management. We'll talk about it in future episodes, but delegation. But when we talk about the one thing, we'll talk about time blocking too in future. Well, we have in the past, but we will again in the future. The one thing is the thing that you're giving special emphasis to in your blocked out time. Yeah. You can't decide that you're going to write a great vision for your company and quit going to work because you're doing that.
Yeah.
But you can, when there are 40 things all competing for your attention to improve and write a process and change things. You say, okay, all those need to be done, but I'm going to work on this one.
Yeah.
And to jump back to something you just said a little bit earlier when you were talking about optimizing and narrowing and being effective, is whenever I'm in a coaching session, or whenever you're coaching yourself through something like this, everything needs to be reduced to something that you can actually do.
Yeah.
Right? And like you said, I'm going to do marketing. Okay, well, that's great. Well, what are you talking about? You're going to choose some marketing channels. You're going to get with an expert and learn about SEO. Maybe you're going to work with Google My Business. even if you get to Google My Business, you narrow it down to that and you say, what am I going to do within that? I'm going to upload 5 pictures and I'm going to put up 2 blogs. Well, or in my case, first I'm going to learn how to do it, what the heck they're talking about, or find somebody to do it for me and concentrate on that till I get it up and running. So you're right. That optimizing and narrowing means getting it down to something you can actually do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's got to be focused. And I think, going back to your time block, you still have all of your responsibilities, but you do have to make special emphasis. And that's when you're going into the office on the weekends, or that's when you're staying up late on the computer. That's when you've cleared your Friday afternoon to just focus on your one thing, to give it that special attention, to optimize your calendar, your time, your energy, your resources for that one thing. And that's why it has to be narrow. That's why it has to be specific, something that you can actually go do. Because if you keep it so broad, what ends up happening is, one, you never arrive at a completion point of that one thing. And so it feels like this one thing is looming for months and months, and that you're not making any progress, which only leads you to not focus on the one thing because it doesn't feel like there's a reward there. But 2, when you don't narrow it down and you give all this time to it, when you say it's just marketing, well, now you're spending Friday afternoon researching on the computer, looking on YouTube or whatever, what you can do for your marketing activities. And it pulls you in a million different directions of how you should focus on it. And now all of a sudden you're buying new software and you're,
Trying to learn
trialing
how
all
to
these
run.
different, you're really not making progress, essentially. You're playing house with the idea rather than actually like executing, right? So it's got to be something that's going to be effective. So anyways, I think let's dive into some of these other obstacles that people have. One of them that I wanted to talk about was the role that vision plays in your one thing. Why is it crucial and necessary that you're building your one thing off of a vision and not just saying, this is my one thing, unless that one thing is your vision?
And I was thinking about a Dr. Seuss poem when I was driving back from Nebraska yesterday. He says, you got brains in your head and feet in your shoes, and you can point your toes any way that you choose. And that's why.
So
Because when you
Martin,
get up in
I
it,
read this book probably once a week. Oh, the places you'll go. You can steer yourself in any direction you choose.
okay.
Not
Really, you
point your
reading the
toes.
book? I probably, it was close.
It was close enough, but no, my daughter, I read that book a lot to her. So
Yeah, and how old is she? 2?
2.5, or about to be 3 in September.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, so you can read it to me also. No, I mean, that's it. I was going to say, when you block off your Friday afternoon, you were talking about doing that and what you're doing. And the way we speak about that a lot is that's the time we block off to work on the business instead of in the business.
Right.
So that is a vision.
Mhm.
If I'm working on that, I mean, we can refine it a lot, but if you don't have the vision of a business that can run without you, E-Myth type of stuff, that's system driven, then what are you doing? But if you've determined that I need to work on my business to make it better and make it run without me, that is a vision. And all of a sudden that gives you a whole lot of activities that are different than if you're just you and the guy with you and your helper in a pickup truck. So all
Right.
you're worrying about there is getting the job done.
Yeah. Well, I think when there's a lack of vision for your day-to-day, well, overall for your company, when there's a lack of vision for your company and where you're going as a business, you end up having unclear priorities in the day-to-day, right? And when you have unclear priorities, you end up doing reactive work. You're just looking for your email for the next thing of what to do. You're waiting for the phone call to dictate whether you're going to start, the next project or what your next action item is. And so it's just reactive, and there's nothing that is proactive about where you want to go. And then because of that, you also fall into this perfectionism of like, you only have so much on your plate and you're going to do whatever you can to make it as perfect as possible. And then you don't delegate because one, there's no clear priorities of what you should be delegating and what you should be doing yourself, but also you're trying to make it so perfect that you never hand it off to somebody else because you worry they're not going to do it as well as you. And so then you just get in this mindset of like, okay, I'm stuck where I'm at, and you have so much anxiety about where you're at because it's not really going anywhere. I was watching a movie just recently about golf, and there's basically the guy gives the analogy that you just have to keep your eye on the flag, and you've got to know where you're going and just stay with it. Not just in golf, but in life. And if you don't keep your eye on the flag, you're going to make bad decisions.
Yeah.
You may pull out driver and go 250 yards the wrong way when you should just be staying on the flag and hitting a pitching wedge or whatever, right? So, I just think with the one thing, if you don't have that vision, it really sets in order a really poor decision-making process for most people, at least an unclear decision-making process. Whereas if you do have that flag, if you do have that vision, you can make a better decision process about where you're going, right?
Yeah, and that's universally the first thing I work with when I work with clients. Most do not come in with a clear vision, and that's our one thing is we have to figure that out. It doesn't have to be some lofty goal. It has to be something like a business that can work without me, or less stress, more free time, more money, whatever it is. But it has to be something we can actually work toward and measure our progress toward. So yeah, vision is the first thing to work on if you don't have one.
Yeah, I also think it's not just about the vision, because sometimes with this one thing, it's not, yes, it applies to the overall vision of us being the most efficient company in the world or whatever your vision is. But this one thing seems so small in that grand story of our company, right? And so I think at the same time, there needs to be really clear goals around what your one thing is, right? And I think we know SMART goals. We've talked about that on this podcast many times. You've probably heard it from many people. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time specific. Did I get that right?
I think real result oriented.
Result oriented. Okay.
Yeah, it's
So-
like, did we like the guy who Andy, who started Hewlett Packard Grove? He said, at some point you got to be able to say, did we do it? Yes or no? No ambiguity, no judgment. Did we do it? And so
Yeah.
that's what I think specific. Did we do that? Yep, we did. Or no, we did not.
Yeah. So, just saying that marketing is your one thing doesn't allow you to do that, right?
Right.
But having something that is results oriented, having something that's smart. And there's another acronym that I learned recently, FAST goals, where it's frequent, ambitious, specific, and transparent. I really like the frequent of just like you're always thinking about it. You have it written down. You're looking at it regularly. You're reviewing it regularly. And then the transparent aspect of letting people know exactly what the goal is, letting them know what your one thing is, giving them updates, complete transparency about what the focus is, I think is extremely valuable to a team, but because it gives everybody direction and an understanding. But I think what that brings is accountability. And so many times the things that we do because we don't, or the things that we're trying to focus on, our one thing, our area of focus, there's no accountability because we're not talking about it, because we don't have anybody else saying, hey, how is that one thing going? How is that goal? How are you doing on the goal? Right? So I think that's a huge piece of like everything here is that there has to be accountability, or else you're going to lend yourself to have distractions. Oh, well, we got this new client, or this new project, or, hey, something's going on with family, or I saw that, this fire came up. And so I'm focusing my energy on that. And so without that accountability, you're going to lend yourself to distraction.
It was kind of funny you mentioned that. I was talking to one of my clients last week, and I don't know whether the story actually happened in my presence a number of years ago or if I read about it, but I've never forgotten it. The guy was saying, whenever his boss gave him instructions, I said, well, what do you do? He said, I do nothing. Hey, what do you mean you do nothing? He said, just that. I do nothing. And if he asks me again, I go, oh my gosh, I'll get on it. But usually he doesn't ever even ask me again. And the reason I do nothing is because he's always coming up with the one things, good, great ideas, but they're just the whim of the day. And then he sets me in motion doing a bunch of work, and he never wants to see it. He doesn't remember telling me. So my mechanism is I do nothing. If he asks me again, I make my apologies and I go do it. But usually he doesn't ever even ask. I thought that was a pretty good story.
Yeah. I bet that happens
Pretty bad, actually. Yeah.
Well, no, but it's real. I think that
Yeah.
I've probably done that many times where I just throw out hey, we need to work on this, or, whatever. And I'm sure the team's like, yeah, we need to work on that. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll get back to you on that if you bring it up again.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not just with one thing in the business, but even as a business, I think there's value in one thing. Like, hey, what do you do really well? What do you do better than anybody else? What are you known for? What's like your secret sauce? What's your one thing as a business? And I think a lot of times we can get pulled in a bunch of different directions because we've talked about this in the past, but we're trying to add value. So we start as, the pool company, but pretty soon now we're building outdoor kitchens and pergolas and, all these different landscaping, hardscaping, all these different things. And there's absolutely, that's how you grow your business. That's, you get customers and then you increase how much you sell to them by adding all these services. But at the same time, what is the one thing that you're really known for? What is your secret sauce? So anyways, that's something else to consider in terms of one thing. Well, I think there's value in this for our listeners. What's one thing that they can go and do? Is it that exercise from the Gary Keller book? Just writing out the 25 things and applying the 80-20 principle?
Yes, and that reminded me too. So the idea was write out 25 things, circle the 5 that will have the most impact, then look at those 5 and circle the 1 that will have the most impact. Can't remember if it was Warren Buffett or Charlie Munger was talking about that. I think it was Warren Buffett this time. But he said, write down 25 things that distract you from your principal occupation, meaning your business. He wasn't doing the 80-20 rule here. He says, now, quit doing any of them.
Perfect.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Quit doing any of them because they're just distracting.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And real quickly before we go, just empathize with our listeners and come up with why do people not do this, right? Not choose. And I mean, I'm sure you can come up with a bunch of things, but one of them is just the tyranny of the urgent. To sit down and write 25 things. I think there are many days you could sit down and write 25 things. You could write 125 things, but then you decide, hey, that's what I'm going to go do, and lock the door and turn the phone off. You can't think of 4, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes there are those obstacles, and you got to kind of get past them and get ginned up. But that is a great place to start.
All right. Well, go write down 25 things and start prioritizing. Start knocking things off the list by narrowing it down to just one of those, and make sure you make it specific. Be transparent about it with yourself and others. Get accountability and make it something that you can get accomplished in a week or 2 so that you feel, I don't know what the chemical is in your brain, the dopamine of getting something off the list and making progress.
Endorphins. Right?
Yeah. So cool. Well, Martin, good to see you again. And
you too, man. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Listeners, thanks for joining in. Subscribe to us on YouTube, share with someone, and go get your one thing written down.
Hey, share with us your one thing.
There you go. Share with us your one thing. We'd love to hear it. Maybe we'll talk about it on the show. All right. See you, Martin.
See you, man.
Thanks for listening to The Cashflow Contractor. Check out our website in the show notes or visit thecashflowcontractor.com.